Preface this video, which is going to be a reading of an essay that I wrote. I'm just going to explain that by inertia, I essentially mean this kind of elasticity, right? So if I say the inertia of reality, what I mean is this kind of principle of elasticity, which just means reality's kind of recursion into its own condition. And if reality is mental by nature, which is a really intuitive way to think of this, is going to be thinking of, and I'll probably get into this, but it's going to be thinking of your own mind, and particularly your subconscious mind, as this kind of mental condition. The condition of your mind at large, which is essentially comprised of the contents of your subconscious mind, is going to be kind of the subject by which inertia is exercised, right? You'll have a lot of recursion into that condition. Whatever the condition of your being is, your experience of reality will recur into that condition. So with that being said, let's get into an essay I wrote called The Principle of Inertia. And I'll try to explain anything that, as I'm reading through, I realize isn't contextualized correctly. So hopefully this is a good format to consume, this kind of information. But let's find out. The introduction. In contemporary physics, inertia refers to the tendency to remain unchanged, or resistance to change. It is the nature whereby something's condition will remain as it is until acted upon by an outside force. Inertia functions as an impulse towards the unchanged condition, whatsoever that condition might be. We can label whatever that condition is at a given time as the current natural condition, because it is the unchanged nature in question. Natural condition can be used interchangeably with inertial condition, so as to not reify an explanation of an inertial condition with inertia itself. Whatsoever is the natural condition of a thing is that thing's inertial condition. We might consider a given condition natural due to that system's impulsion into itself and its conditions. Perhaps the most important property of inertia to understand in regards to metaphysics and mentalism is that inertia is assisted. Assistance to inertia is the impulse towards the unchanged state, or as previously mentioned, the natural condition, which is also resistance to the changing of that state. Resistance to inertia is difficult, but possible. That's why it's resistance. It requires force. It's not autonomic like assistance to inertia is. Assistance to inertia is impelled, resistance is compelled. Assistance to inertia is autonomic because it is the impulse towards that which is natural. That which is already natural is, in a manner of speaking, the path of least resistance, or in this case, the path of no resistance. When you're tired, it takes willpower to stay awake. It is difficult. It is resistance to inertia. Sleep, being quite literally an inert state, is assisted when you're tired. It doesn't take effort. You're impelled to assist inertia and sleep. And let me clarify this, because if you're really clever, you might think that it's not really an impulsion if it's the natural kind of base condition. It's more just recursion, or it's not really an impulsion, but a return to that after there is deviation therefrom, which you'd be correct, ultimately. The impulsion to sleep is a great one to demonstrate inertia, or assistance and resistance to inertia, because it lends itself to a more comprehensive understanding and not just knowing of the principle. When you're riding in a car and the brakes are pumped and you're impelled forward somewhat, that is assistance to inertia. Or I guess you'd be compelled, but you're not compelling yourself. You're impelled forward due to resistance to change, which itself is assistance to the unchanged condition, which in this case is the velocity of the car. You may notice that as you're impelled forward, you fight the impulsion by bringing yourself back to the seat, and maybe grounding your feet somewhat. which is resistance to inertia. Although in this scenario, there's actually two inertial conditions being assisted and resisted. Kind of have a little bit of a duality here. That of the velocity of the car, and that of your body's position in the seat. If you consider your body's position in the seat inertial, you're compelled forward by the outside change in velocity, forcing resistance to the inertia of your position. In this way, the principle of inertia is quite polar. I usually prefer the term polarity to any kind of duality. In Ken Wheeler's field theory, magnetic attraction is an impulsion towards the plane of inertia between fields, which is to say resistance to inertia. In Walter Russell's Universal One, the unmanifestation of form is a return to inertia, whereas the manifestation or integration of form would be resistance to inertia. The primordial, unmanifest, and inert realm of pure potential, which would be the realm of inertia, which is of course assistance to inertia, given that all form disintegrates and unmanifests eventually, if only to manifest once more. Likewise, in that theorem, integration, or the manifestation of form, is resistance to this inert unmanifest state of undifferentiated substance, thought being the creative process of resisting a state of inactivity through activity. Yeah, so sometimes I might comment on this a little bit, only to say the exact same thing. That's okay. Now we're done with the introduction. Let's get into the elasticity and plasticity of inertia. Both elasticity and plasticity are properties of inertia. By plasticity, a property of malleability or a quality of being shaped or molded is meant, and by elasticity, the property of something returning to its natural shape or condition after having deviated therefrom is meant. Kind of like how a rubber band returns to its previous shape after being stretched. These two seem somewhat contradictory, however they work in tandem. Inertia being assisted by virtue of its naturalness, path of least resistance, or impulsion unto itself, is its elasticity. Whatsoever that natural condition is the whereunto that elasticity is inertial assistance will impel towards. Kind of butchered that. Oh well. That being said, inertia is also plastic. Its condition is developed by resistance to the prior condition. It is receptive in principle, and whatsoever it receives will alter its condition. The subconscious mind, for instance, this is really a good analogy for understanding how these two work in tandem. Being in a very real way, the inertial mind is elastic in its tendency unto itself, both as a determinant in literal materialization of the mental condition and regarding its affection on consciousness in day-to-day life. And it is plastic in its ability to change despite this elasticity. Should the inertial condition, let's say the moods you tend to inhabit, are resisted enough, with enough persistence over time, the inertial condition will certainly develop. Resistance to inertia in such a situation should be noted as a peculiar feeling, difficult yet gratifying, and it will lend the subject a greater depth of comprehension of the principle in question. Continuing to build off this, as mentioned, these properties of inertia act in tandem and can be said to be dynamic, especially regarding the relationship between assistance and resistance to inertia. Inertia acts much like a tether. Assistance to inertia is tension, resisting a drawing away from inertia, and resistance to inertia is tension. Did I write the same thing twice? From drawing away from inertia, or from the inertial condition. Oh no, I didn't. This is much like a rubber band. The inertial condition of the rubber band is its relaxed, non-stretched state. When you stretch it, it becomes taut and tense. This is tension resulting from resistance to inertia. In stretching the band, you are resisting its inertial state of relaxation, wherein it is, say, 5 centimeters long. The tension you feel while stretching the rubber band is assistance to the inertial condition. Yeah. Now let's say you stop. You may note that after having stretched the rubber band for some time, that its length is now, say, 7 centimeters long. Its inertial condition is now altered. The band is elastic, as the inertial condition of reality. Though it is assisted and elastic, it is also plastic and can be developed by resistance to the current inertial condition. So for instance, your mind has a tendency unto itself, but that isn't to say that it has this kind of infinite regression wherein nothing can change therein, it will always kind of develop itself. It can alter itself. The condition that is inertial, for instance, a mental condition, can develop, and that will be the new inertial condition. But it takes resistance to do that, and that's why any kind of resistance to change is, somewhat difficult. Alright, now let's get into the more fun stuff. There's going to be more metaphysics related stuff, and here I get into something I call manifestation dynamics. Before expounding on the most important applications of the principle of inertia, those being to mentalism proper, or the metaphysics of mind, manifestation dynamics will be elaborated because it is a principle universal in application beyond what is only related to mind. Of course, everything ultimately is. By manifestation dynamics, the dynamic between the manifestation of form and the subsequent unmanifestation of form is meant. The dynamic occurs as follows. Manifestation occurs as resistance to the primordial and inert unmanifest reality, manifesting as the form thereof. Or the form of whatever that unmanifest principle's activity is. So thought. Manifestation follows as assistance to inertia, an impulse towards that antecedent unmanifest reality. Which, if the base reality is unmanifest, then the disintegration of form is kind of that impulse towards inertia, right? It should be noted that manifestation is the manifestation of whatever that unmanifest reality is, which is, of course, the absolute, the one, or the mind. Because the absolute is all that exists, manifestation will be in reference to the only existent reality by necessity of logic. The simple principle of manifestation dynamics in reference to inertia can be considered as follows. Inert, unmanifest, formless state. Then you have a manifestation of form as resistance to inertia. Then the unmanifestation of form as assistance to inertia. This dynamic is apparently cyclical, but is better described as dynamic to implicate a simultaneity between the two, as in the two occur largely simultaneously at different scales. One merely being apparently predominant at a given time. For instance, though a human body is predominantly generative and manifestative for the first decades of life, there are still cells degenerating. And as the body ages, it becomes a predominantly disintegrative, degenerative, or unmanifestative state. There are still generative processes occurring in the body while this is happening, though. You're still using food or, nutrition from food to develop cells and all that. Manifestation as a process is one of defining reality. Form is definition, quite literally the defined form of reality. As the manifestation of form develops, so too does the definition, or defined form of reality. Reality is self-configurative and perpetually self-defining in this manner. Kind of like CTMU stuff here, huh? Though the form itself unmanifests, the definition gained from the manifestation of that form cultures and defines the unmanifest inertial state. That is to say that the definition is kind of memorized. It develops that condition, which defines what is then manifested thereafter. Since this memory is the content of the inertial condition, it is the determinant in continued manifestation. See, every time I comment on it, I just say the next thing. It's been a while since I wrote this, but hopefully that kind of helps. Anyways, all right. Then I have another one of these kind of arrow graphs, so I'll just explain that real quick. You have the inert, unmanifest formless state. You have the manifestation of form as resistance to inertia following this. Then you have the unmanifestation of form as assistance to inertia following that. And then following this, you have the manifestation of form in reference to the inertial content. The manifestation itself is resistive to the inertia of unmanifest reality generally, but assistive to the inertial content. So let me explain that, because, that might be a little bit confusing. If reality is mental, then the unmanifestation of form, or, matter, for instance, is on one hand assistance to the inertia, if you consider the inertia of reality to be, totally unmanifest. But on the other hand, the manifestation of form is resistive to the unmanifest reality, right? Because base reality is unmanifest. But because the manifestation is referencing the contents of that, universal mind, let's say, the condition of that universal mind, like, let's say the material universe is a manifestation of that universal mind, its continued manifestation is referring to, the contents of that universal mind, the unmanifest contents. So that would be assistance to that inertia, but the manifestation itself, as form, would be resisting the substance inertia. It would be assisting the content inertia, but resisting the inertia of substance as, primordially unmanifest. I hope that makes sense. The inertial condition is developed by feedback, right? So this gets back into the plasticity. This is how that plasticity is exercised. Excuse me. Exactly as information from conscious experience cultures in the deep of the subconscious mind. Since the inertial condition is a determinant in the manifestation of form, which is then experienced as feedback into inertia, we have a feedback loop wherein the inertial condition either affirms or reconfigures its content. Reconfiguration occurs through conscious resistance to inertia via exercise of mental causal agency against the impulse of inertia. The feedback loop of inertial recursion can be regarded as follows. Inert unmanifest formless state follows as manifestation of form as resistance to inertia, follows as unmanifestation of form as resistance to inertia, follows as manifestation of form and resistance to inertial content, or in reference to inertial contents, follows as unmanifestation of form and memorization of definition. So you have that manifestation of form being experienced and memorized in the mind. Follows as inertial condition affirmed, follows as manifestation of form in reference to inertial content. I have some figures here. Let me see if it'd be easy to explain them. No, but I kind of just want to get through this. I don't want this video to be too long, but you guys can read this if you want. I'll link it in the description. Mentalism. This is the next section. Mentalism. We're gonna get into. By the way, when I say that, you can basically, switch it out with idealism, or any kind of immaterialism. Ultimately, would necessitate the same stuff. Mentalism, similar to what you might call metaphysical idealism, essentially the same thing, maintains that the absolute, ultimate underlying reality is the mind, of which consciousness is an attribute. For the sake of digestion, the mind can be equated to being and consciousness as awareness of being, and further, manifestation as consciousness's awareness of being something. Or manifestation would be the extrinsic attribute of that awareness of being something, or the kind of having an object for that awareness of being to fixate on. I'm kind of deviating from what I wrote, but I'm just giving you guys extra context. Of course, it may help to consider mind on the absolute scale as the mind of God or the divine mind, of which mind as we experience it is kind of an individuation, a focal point, a center therein, or a particularization. Essentially, kind of developed my theorem on this a little bit after I wrote this, but our minds are a particularization of that universal mind. There's the particular mind and the universal. I digress. If reality is mental, then the principles inherent to reality are mental. Of course, this means the principle of inertia as described here will have considerable applications to psychology. to mind at both the macrocosmic and microcosmic scale. So like I said, the universal and the particular scale, our minds and the divine mind. Since manifestation dynamics covered much of what there is to speak of on the macrocosmic scale, we are left with the microcosmic scale, namely kind of metaphysical psychology and how inertia fits into mental dynamics between the conscious and subconscious minds. Be advised, I may use subconscious in place of unconscious, despite the latter being used in the similar contexts in contemporary psychology. To define these terms somewhat more clearly for the context I'll be presenting them in, consider consciousness, awareness of being, to exist as something of a gradient or scale or even a circle, the center of which is concentrated consciousness, kind of like the monad symbol, right? And everything from that center to the radius is greater and lesser degrees of consciousness, or rather subconsciousness. Is probably arbitrated a short distance from the center, for even as we go about our days in consciousness, we experience different things with greater and lesser degrees of active consciousness. For instance, you may be focused on one thing but doing another absent-mindedly. Most habits are done with less active participation by the conscious mind. They can be said to be subconscious mental subroutines, or for the purposes of this paper, inertial subroutines, as they are by the individual as pure assistance to the inertial condition. The inertial condition of the individual's mind is a microcosm to the inertial condition of reality, and functions much the same. The inertial condition of the individual mind is conditioned and defined by information that is experienced by consciousness and internalized beyond the focal center of consciousness in a manner much like a kind of mental osmosis. This is the principle underlying memorization. The internal inertial condition of the mind is conditioned by memory, or conditioned as memory, you could say. This internalized information saturates the subconscious mind to greater or lesser degrees, and in doing so, despite the impact of such contents being potentially unknown to the individual, manifest in consciousness. The most obvious examples of this are habit, addiction, appetite, and trauma. But even instinct is determined by the inertial condition of a lineage or chain of being, or even just a deep-rooted inertia in the soul, we could say. The urge to act out habit or addiction is pure assistance to the inertial condition. Resistance to such an assisted state is much like resistance to gravity. It is resistance to the path of least resistance, right? The inertial condition is assisted in this context. For example, because whatsoever the individual has internalized in the deep of their subconscious will naturally surface to the conscious mind, since they aren't ultimately two different entities. This surfacing is much like bubbles from thermal vents in the bottom of the ocean of subconsciousness, surfacing to the waves of consciousness above the depths. It is likely that the individual won't even consciously recognize the surfacing of these bubbles, merely acting them out by habit because inertia is naturally assisted. It doesn't take concentration, attention, nor effort to do directly. In fact, mental concentration is in itself resistance to inertia. As mentioned above, with the example of sleep and inattentiveness generally as inert states, the urge to fall asleep being a very much deconcentrative one, whereas waking up when you're tired in the morning is a higher effort, active, and concentrative thing. You ever, if you try to meditate, for instance, you'll probably, and why don't you try this tonight after watching this video? Lay in bed and just don't think about anything, and you'll notice that thoughts, memories, things of this nature will just surface, which is a reason why meditation can be super useful, right? We can learn a lot about ourselves just from that. That is this kind of surfacing to the surface of consciousness from the subconsciousness that I'm talking about. All right, continuing on. Moreover, the manifestation of external reality being an effect of the agency of the mind, consciousness, we should wonder what the role of inertia is in such mental causal agency more clearly. The unfolding of reality is catalyzed by consciousness, but subconsciousness and consciousness are principally similar. The subconsciousness being much like the plastic memory of consciousness, it should also be noted that consciousness memorizes unto its plastic subconscious receptive principle. It also remembers. As reality is self-referential, remembrance is self-reference. The surfacing of bubbles as described above is this remembering and self-reference, regardless as to whether or not the individual is metacognizant as to what is exactly happening when the surfacing or remembrance occurs. It is the nature of the mind to reference itself, so metacognizance, as an awareness that self-reference is occurring as it occurs, is not necessary to, validate this. This remembrance is assistance to inertia. Remember, the contents and information being remembered and referenced by the mind to begin with is the inertial and internal conditions. So, what happens when the internal condition is externalized, made manifest in external reality, then re-experienced by consciousness, and thereafter re-internalized? Given that the internalization of information is what defines and molds the inertial condition, this re-experience, which happens all the time, is a repetitive feedback loop. This is why routines can be difficult to change, though not impossible, as the inertial condition is plastic after all. Breaking routines is even colloquially called breaking molds. It is resistance to inertia, whereas acting out the routine in your experience of external reality is assistance to inertia. The feed of experience being the manifestation of the inertial condition, or what you're experiencing being the manifestation of inertial condition. And let me clarify that because what is actually manifesting externally is ultimately the inertial condition, it's more like the subconscious condition is manifesting. But continuing on, let's just repeat that. The feed of experience, being the manifestation of the inertial condition, is experienced by the experiential agent, which is the only agent proper, consciousness. Consciousness experiences itself, which is to say, it experiences its own definition, or condition, which is its subconscious condition, which is to say, it experiences its own inertial condition. That keeps happening. Externalized and objectified subjective condition. Again, this is kind of apart from this video, but it is the nature of the subject to self-objectify itself, which is this to say that it is the nature of the mind to materialize itself, or to generate a self-image of itself within itself, all right? Inertial contents are the contents within the subject, objectifying themselves as happenstance, affairs, experience, and bridges of incidents. Consciousness is both reactive and active. It is both transformative and conservative. When it is reactive, it is reacting to the externalization of the antecedent, internal, and inertial condition. This often assists inertia in that it affirms the inertial condition by, in a sense, verifying and validating its reality after being experienced in consciousness post-manifestation. Right, so when let's say you experience something as a manifestation of what you are, right, at the core, in your subconscious, in your soul, you experience it, your experience of it is taken into your mind, and that taking it in kind of affirms the root cause to begin with. Consciousness is active when it is not merely reactive to the world around it, but consciously shaping it. More specifically, consciously shaping its reaction to it, because that's what's going to change the feedback into the subconscious or the soul. Consciously changing its reaction to externalized contents, which is active, and thereby altering the feedback into the inertial condition. See, I keep doing that. In doing so, the inertial condition is developed because the feedback into inertia is altered, and thereafter the manifestation of reality adheres to the new inertial condition. Reactivity assists inertia. It is reactive because it is reaffirming and re-experiencing something already active. Activity resists inertia. This is why all activity is difficult and all inactivity is base and easy. And by the way, just for any fellow monists, maybe Neoplatonists watching this, I'm kind of affirming a degree of mental causal power, not necessarily consciousness, as most people understand the term, or the condition of the soul, being causal in itself, by necessity, as kind of an inheritance of the nature of the one, right? I definitely don't agree with any ultimately apophatic method of defining the one, because then you're, suggesting a privation of the one. But I can kind of see some people watching this and being confused or kind of disagreeing. I'll probably have to make a video just talking completely about how I systemize this kind of mental causal power or manifestation, which is definitely a lot different from what you'd expect. So, don't get turned off to the idea right away. All right, and this is just the reflection section coming up next. We're almost done, but this is just stuff I kind of wanted to tag on and also to kind of summarize. So let's just get right into it. The principle of inertia is the impulsion of nature unto itself. The principle of inertia is referred to in manifest reality as the impulsion of conditions unto themselves, or inertial elasticity, and resistance to change therefrom. The principle of inertia is the repulsion of a condition from that which is unalike to it. Inertia is repulsive when resistive, and impulsive when assistive. This impulsion of reality unto its own condition is necessitated by self-referentiality, which is necessitated by virtue of reality's self-containment. Right, so there's nothing beyond reality. We can get into Chris Langen's, I believe he calls it the reality principle. This impulsion of nature unto itself can be considered assistance to inertia. Since this impulsion is indeed impulsive, it should be considered passive, inert, and default, requiring no activity or force to be maintained. So hopefully that kind of clarifies how I use impulsion. I'm trying to kind of distinct it from compulsion, wherein something has to be compelled to do something. Since there does exist an active principle inherent to reality, there exists an observed principle that can resist and does resist inertia. Since reality is self-contained and utterly unified, these are not contrary principles, rather complementary principles of a single underlying nature. Though assistance to inertia, or impulsion into the conditions of nature, should be default, so should the nature whereby reality resists inertia, since it indeed exists. Right, this thing cannot emerge out of a lack of it, right? Because that would make no sense whatsoever. Since inertia is in essence resistance to change and... Whoops, lost my spot. Since inertia is in essence resistance to change, and consequently the impulsion of nature unto its own condition, and there can be no condition beyond the potential of reality, the absolute, due to anything potentially real being necessarily being encompassed by reality, resistance to the current inertial condition can be considered a self-configurative principle that, while impelled into the prior condition, develops the condition, since the conditioning principle is both plastic and receptive to feedback. The configurable nature of conditions is called plasticity. Inertia refers to a condition, and in practical terms, a condition is defined by either principle or content. The inertial condition refers to the contents of that condition, defining the nature of the impulsion into that condition. For example, habit, addiction, and instinct are all conditions defined by contents to which inertia is exercised. Inertia is both elastic and plastic. Elasticity refers to inertia's impulsion into itself, and plasticity refers to the development of the inertial condition, or the malleability of it. Resistance to inertia is the catalyst in developing the inertial condition, since it can be conditioning, thereafter configuring the inertial condition. Example, altering the consumption of information allowed to saturate the mind, stopping and starting habits. Elasticity and plasticity lend themselves to understanding the dynamic between assistance and resistance to inertia, since resistance to inertia ultimately develops the inertial condition, thereafter becoming inertial assistive. The principle of inertia being a principle inherent to reality, it's a lot like just the principle of self-referentiality, which is something I also want to write about, is observable in many planes that overlap, some of which being psychology, metaphysics, physics, manifestation dynamics, and field theory. The manifestation of form is the objectification of the subjective condition, making it assistance to inertia, the inertia of that subjective condition. Because the form is the objectification of the inertial condition and is then experienced by the subject, it can be said to be an affirmative feedback loop, wherein the subjective condition is objectified and formed, experienced in consciousness, thereafter saturating the subject with the experience of itself objectified, then affirming the subjective condition that catalyzed its own objectification. So, affirmative feedback loop. This feedback loop is akin to self-examination, its subsequent affirmation. Such a feedback loop is inertial assistive because it implies that the manifestation of reality is most likely to manifest the contents of the inertial condition. As the experiential agent, the active mental principle consciousness is capable of resistance to inertia by way of actively saturating the subconscious with whatever conditioning is desired, thereafter influencing the inertial condition. Kind of, my tone almost sounded like that was going to be a question. My apologies if that confused you. Because reality is mental, all mental processes will be wholly reflected and manifest reality as physical processes. Therefore, manifestation dynamics reveal a dynamic simultaneity between what appears to be two inertial processes, but is ultimately just one. Those being A, form as manifested configuration of the ether, or the substantiating principle, thereby resisting the inertia of the unmanifest ether, or just unmanifest reality, and B, form being a manifestation of its corresponding antecedent mental condition, or its prior mental condition, right? Which means it's assisting the inertia of that condition. The manifestation of form then being inertial resistive in the context that it generally resists the inertia of the unmanifest substance of reality, and inertial assistive in that form is the form of the inertial condition of the mind, whatsoever that condition is, which is then formed. The inertial condition is formed by feedback, which, due to the nature of the information comprising the feedback, which is largely referenced from inertia to begin with. My bad. Let me reread that. We're almost done here. Let me just go over that one more time. The inertial condition is formed by feedback, which, due to the nature of the information comprising the feedback, is largely referenced from inertia to begin with. This creates an affirmative feedback loop wherein the contents of the inertial condition manifest themselves or experienced as feedback by consciousness and are committed to the memory of inertia, thereafter affirming the inertial condition and cementing its position in reality, or more specifically, the mind. Resistance to inertia alters feedback. Feedback is conditioning, as conditions are formed by content. All content saturates the inertia of the mind or the subconscious of the mind. Therefore, resistance to inertia develops the inertial condition. This is the formation of habit. And ladies and gentlemen, that is all. And again, this whole time I've been reading a paper that I wrote. It's 9.5 pages, like 10 pages, something like that. So towards the end there, my throat got a little parched and my lips a little dry, so I apologize for that. But if you want to read this, I'm going to try to link it in the description. You can find it definitely on my blog. You can go to my Instagram account. If I'm not able to link anything in this, because I just started this YouTube channel, and they have like a policy thing, then find me on Instagram at Metamundanity, and you can go to my link tree there, and you can go onto my blog, or you can look up metamundanity.com wordpress.com or something like that. And that should take you to my blog, where I have the full paper there, The Principle of Inertia. If you'd like to read it, I also have the PDF there, so you can download it, you can print it out, you can share it. Let me know what you guys think, because this was a pretty long video. It was a pretty long essay that I wrote. Let me know if you guys like this kind of format for, you know, some of the work that I've written. I know a lot of people prefer listening to reading, which, you know, I respect that. So if you preferred this to reading it, and you kind of got more out of it, because, you know, at some points I contextualized it, then, you know, let me know, because I will then continue to do this as I write more stuff. So have a splendid week ahead, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.